Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be an extension of a video quite some time ago. I posted some on the Mons Claudianus quarry. Now that's in Egypt, so for instance you see Luxor, for instance with Temple of Karnak, Temple of Luxor, Valley of the Kings, Edfu, and there we have the Aswan quarry, which most people will probably be familiar with. But there are two very other important quarries, and they are those, Mons Por Ferretes and Mons Claudianus. So you get an idea of scale because these two, well, Aswan was, Romans were also quarrying there, but we have Mons Por Ferretes and Mons Claudianus, so that's where Aswan, the Mons Claudianus and Mons Por Ferretes. And then we have Rome and Constantinople. Now even the stone used in the quarries, used in Baalbek, for instance, originates from both of these quarries, and again across the classical, the Roman period, we see especially Mons Porphyrites being a very important quarry. But let's look at, so Mons Claudianus, here's the Roman encampment there. Now there was an Egyptian presence prior to the Romans, going back quite some time, and they were sourcing stone from here. But if we look at the Roman encampment, and both in Greek and Latin, the inscriptions that are placed there, but more importantly we also have the quarry marks. So the quarry workers in Greek and Roman, Latin, would mark the stone. So you would know from what portion of a quarry it comes from, so that the stone would perfectly match other pieces. Because even just within this single site, there were several quarrying sites, and each stone had a slightly different texture to the markings there. And these were important because then as you're transporting them and moving eventually to Rome, Constantinople, Baalbek, these other sites across the Roman world, you would want to know precisely where it come from, but also it would be marked so that the label would not slide off, and you could then trace that through and match these stones up. But more importantly, especially at Mons Claudianus, we have a whole bunch of Ostracon. So rather than paper and papyrus, it was very common to write on pottery shards and pieces of pottery. So these Ostracon from Mons Claudianus especially are exquisite, detailed work records detailing the water and food rations of each of the classes of workers. They provide elaborate records of the quarry operations, how many civilians, how many slave labourers, how many professional stonemasons and soldiers to guard these sites. So essentially we have the receipts, like it's detailed records. But if we move to just to the north of Mons Claudianus, we move to Mons Porphyrites. There's the aerial view of a Roman encampment there. It's detailed in Pliny the Elder. A Roman centurion was said to have found this site, and I don't believe that the ancient Egyptians were quarrying here because it's on a very high mountain. It's quite difficult to get the stone down and to transport it. But also from Mons Claudianus, the road leading out of there were stations along the way. So each station would essentially mark one day's journey that was expected to move these stones, and especially because they're moving through the desert, these stations would provide water and other supplies to the workers moving these stones. So again, a very exquisite, elaborate, the receipts are still there. But here's a shot. So Porphyry is that comes from the name purple, because the stone was especially valued because of Emperial Purple. And at the site as well, we see that the stones had their quarry marks placed on there. So Mons Porphyrites, I think there was only 2 working quarry sites. There was about 6 or more at Mons Claudianus. But again, we see these quarry marks where, again, to trace and move these stones around. There'll be a lot of links in the description in regards to especially Porphyry. Porphyry is an igneous stone. It is, because of the high quartz content, it has the same Mohs hardness as granite or basalt and these other stones. and it is also a very, very tough stone in that it doesn't wear down, and is, again, it's essentially has the qualities of granite. Now, these are in Constantinople. We have, again, we can find them in the Pantheon, many other places, these Porphyry single piece columns. You get an idea of the size of this column. This is the column of Constantinople. Now, there has been, this was built in drums, but again, we see the detailed work of the laurels around there, and now there is this brace there because it's a very earthquake prone region, and that's one of the reasons why you're building column drums, because they absorb the earthquake, as whereas single piece columns, if they don't have a big heavy weight pushing down, they topple very easily. But that's some examples. Now, again, this is in Istanbul, Constantinople, some of the porphyry sarcophagi that have been built. Now, they're very large, and just to give an idea, now, for instance, this one, for instance, nearly 4 meters across, 3.1 meters high, including the lid. So these compare in size to, for instance, the boxes in the Seraphine. We also see different styles where they have a neatly squared off, but also we have the tapered inward styles as well. And there are others that go right down to the bottom, but that it's only a shallow, so the weight of these, even though they're a little bit smaller than the Seraphine boxes, because they have so much still remaining internal, the weight is, just as the size is comparable, so the weight would be comparable, might also be a bit heavier than these boxes, and they will move a huge distance in comparison to, for instance, the Seraphine boxes. These are in Rome. This is in Rome. The sarcophagi of Saint Helena. Again, much is made about the carving on the inside, but we have three-dimensional, high quality carvings. So it's the Seraphine box with the addition of the complicated carving. Highly polished as well. You see from the sheen there. The small reduction in size is really not an issue. It's just they're a little bit smaller and they weigh a little bit less, but if you include the elaborate carving detail and the distance they will travel, they surpass the technical qualities used, for instance, in the Seraphine boxes. This is the sarcophagi of Saint Constantina, the daughter of Constantine. And again, you see, it's not just a giant, super heavy, squared off box. It's just, again, a whole new level of detail on top. And this type of polish, so even if you've got the advantage of a steel chisel, the polishing you cannot polish off like this. So you can do a relatively rough cut with a chisel, but then you still need to polish those down, and it comes down to abrasives. Again, there's so many examples, but these high quality porphyry statues, which include this kind of flowing robe detail, again, which just surpasses all of the sculpture that comes before, to get all these little folds and all these little details in there. It's undeniable, really, the level and the skill that goes in here. This is a giant water tub. I'll put links because this is by no means the entirety of it. There are so many columns, basalt, granite, porphyry statues and sculptures of 3D photorealistic detail. This is valued at something like $2 billion. I think this particular piece is at the moment. If I just saw the headline of an article, so don't quote me precisely on. But again, the value in places such as the Vatican Museum of these artifacts is enormous. But we come back to Mons Por Ferretes and Mons Claudianus, and there's a very important feature I want to show here. But okay, for instance, you can identify the stone to the particular quarry because of a unique. So even though all granite is granite, but different granite quarries have different properties, and so apart from, also they come from Aswan, but also there's single piece giant columns that come from Mons Claudianus, and inside the Pantheon there's also single piece porphyry sculptures. Diocletian's palace in Split in Croatia, in Baalbek as well. Hagia Sophia has, where it's precisely fit floor panels, columns, statues. They're just scattered across the Roman Empire. And again, the level, the stone, yeah. This type of architecture, I like it just, I don't know how, you can't argue, if you want to argue, okay, but this is on a different level of creating these giant open spaces, such as in the Hagia Sophia. Just takes, it's, well, I don't know how to cut, yeah, but also have a blue mosque as well. But we come back to Mons Claudianus, and so here we see the same column, so you can see this stone, and get an idea from the people of the size of this particular column. There's another example, so you see the end of a column there. And also, we still have the nub, let's call it the boss, that was, so, for instance, you can still see them here, they have been chipped off, but there's another example, so that would be an important, to carry in and to move and drag these things along. It's common practice to have these bosses attached to it, so not just for lifting, but also for moving them along. It's just a very convenient way to do it. And then when you finish it off, you just remove it. So, for instance, you'll see those types of things at the Menkaure Pyramid, many other places. There's a note, so you can see the remainder of where these bits have been broken off. But, is that in order? Okay, so Mons Claudianus. Now, there are others, but for instance, this giant, we have these flange on the edge, on the end of this column. There you can see as well. Back to this. So these are in Greece and Turkey, and where these colossal monolithic column blanks were still in the quarry, because again, it's sort of described in Pliny and other that this was an industry. Statues, columns were shipped and moved around. It was an industry. But what we have is monolithic column blanks in the quarries. Now, these, because of these were marble, but they're still, like, firstly, marble is, try and work with some marble. It's not sandstone. It's quite hard to work with. Easier than granite, but the techniques used to work marble are the same as to work granite. But we have, again, just an example of monolithic column blanks, from the quarry. In some of these quarries, for instance, here, Mount is really high. It's down, there's a big fall off that side as well. But we come back to Mons Claudianus, and again we see these flanges. So we go back. Notice for flange, flanges here, flanges there, flanges everywhere. And this is a signature. And we come back to Mons Por Ferretes as well, so Mons Claudianus with his, and there are other smaller ones. I'm just going to focus on the large column, and even this broken column, so probably was recycled, but flange as a standard signature. Mons Por Ferretes, where you get the Emperial Purple, and again we see the flanges on the end of the columns. So monolithic column blanks, flanges on the edge of the column, and we see these Mons Claudianus. And for instance, this is Pompey's pillar. This is from Aswan, the granite. But on top of it, what we have is a Corinthian capital, again a Roman signature. And it was even probably about 21 foot high statue of Porphyry of Diocletian there on the top, according to older records, but the pieces don't survive. But still, even if this was repurposed, they still managed to put a giant Corinthian capital on the top. So that's it, Mons Porphyrites and Mons Claudianus, Roman quarries.